Today's conversation is really about what happens when people stop being the end of the story and starts becoming the doorway into purpose. Our guest is Ben Oofana. Ben's journey has taken him through heartbreak, destructive relationships, spiritual searching, indigenous healing traditions, and deep inner transformation. What I appreciate about Ben's story is that purpose didn't come from trying to become someone else. It emerged from learning to heal, listen, and reconnect with who he already is underneath his past pain. Welcome to Conquering FUD Through Mental Fitness. I am your host, Pennie Wilson, and Ben, welcome. So glad to have you.
Thank you for bringing me on today, Pennie.
Yeah, it's a joy. We're looking forward to learning about your story and finding out how you discovered your purpose. So I really want to take our listeners through the journey of how that looked for you, especially in the early years. So often before we discover what our life is about, we're being guided by something quiet, almost even silent. One of our community members this last week called it the whisperings of the soul. It was so beautiful. But what did that look like for you in the early years before you had discovered exactly? I know you said that you were called and attracted to the indigenous cultures. And what was that process like for you as you were discovering how to use your gifts?
I was reflecting on the early years growing up, and there was closeness with my mom initially, and then she veered more into evangelical Christianity, and then when she remarried too, there's all that dysfunction that, like so many of us, we find ourselves in all this weirdness, of families and their drama and their not healthy lifestyles and the disconnectedness, and that's just so typical. Yet, from an early age, maybe 3 or so, our parents in those days often used the television set as the babysitter. And so when the cowboy and Indian movies were on and the natives were getting killed, I'd be screaming, throwing fits. But there was this fascination with Native Americans, and which continued to grow. And when my mom was earning her master's in accounting, I would go to the university library and check out stacks of books on all these tribes that were written, I don't know, anywhere 1840s, 50s, up to maybe 1940s or 50s. Anthropologists and tribal agents working for the federal government, missionaries, other people who recorded these accounts, mainly from the native elders. And I was so fascinated by all this. And when I heard about the traditional native doctors, I was thinking to myself, if ever given the opportunity, this is what I'll do with my life. And no one else that I had any contact with had any inclination towards these sorts of things. But something I felt very strongly about, and I started saving money at 15, and by 17, I was headed out on my own already. Still had a year to complete in high school. And I made it as far as Oklahoma, landed in a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians, and was sitting up all night in the peyote meetings with the native elders. And it was in one of these meetings that I first met my mentor, Horace Dolkai, who's the last of their extraordinarily powerful doctors. And I was afraid he wouldn't be receptive to me, but I approached him after watching him on a few occasions, treating his patients. But when I asked him, he just said, "What are you doing this weekend? Can you start fasting?" And still shaking. It's like, sure. And the apprenticeship itself was extraordinarily difficult, intense. I mean, he would transmit portions of his own healing gifts to me. And in order for those powers to work through you, you're expected to earn the right to work with them. You go through the vision quest, which typically entails fasting the 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. And I first did that with my mentor. There was, for some years after, like, I put myself back in college to reassemble myself after a few years of intensive training. And when I started working with people individually, as that transmission began to awaken inside of me, it was like pouring hydrogen peroxide into an infected wound. That's when the trauma began to surface from my childhood and adolescence. And I found myself reenacting that in my attempts to form intimate relationships. So it was a very long, intensive process of, first just being not knowing what to do, flailing in the dark with a lot of that traumatic wounding, sought out a psychotherapist. And that's where I began to gain a cognitive understanding of my wounding dysfunction.
Right.
That it wasn't actually healing the trauma itself. And
Right.
so that's led me to develop a whole intensive series of meditation practices. I would taught myself to dive into the depths of all that pain, and I would keep
Yeah.
breathing, fully immersed in what I was feeling,
Mm.
sometimes for hours on end. But at a certain point, I could feel it breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. And there was these powerful emanations of warmth that began to emerge from within. And with that, a growing sense of connectedness to a higher power. I still work with this practice every day. I'm not in pain like that, thankfully,
Mm.
but I devise or develop many versions of these practices, which I teach to nearly everyone I work with, as long as they're lucid, conscious,
Yeah.
and if we're able to communicate in the same language.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you were guided in those early years by this internal not knowing what it was, right? Wanting to
Yeah.
learn, having this attraction to the indigenous cultures, going to books and just finding that little whisper and being guided by that. That is so powerful and beautiful. And I think many people are guided in that same way without really knowing why. And then
Hmm.
just taking action and you found your way into your mentor. And I remember that moment of feeling that for myself, like that that huge feeling in my heart, like I know I'm here for a reason. I need to connect with this person and then being guided through that process of learning what that looks like for you and using those gifts. That's amazing. And then
Hmm.
recognizing that your own journey brought out the healing that needed to happen. I've always believed that as we point toward one of the mental fitness tools I use is a visual that represents desire of the sun on one side and then clouds of fear and everything else we don't want on the other side. So,
Hmm.
as you're pointing toward the sun, your desired outcome, what you wanted to experience and do, it naturally brought out those things that weren't aligned with who you are. They're not really a part of who you are in your alignment of your true identity, right? So as you're
Yeah.
going through that healing process, they start to come up and being pushed out like a sliver. I love that you mentioned hydrogen peroxide. That's one of the healing, cleansing things, right? So I want to go back a minute to your experience as you noticed the patterns and you were working through. You said you were repeating the patterns of that you noticed from your childhood.
I found myself forming attachments to women who were either disinterested, unavailable. Part of it stems from the fact that I didn't have any guidance during this period. I
Yeah.
worked with the psychotherapist and she was very helpful and she did the best she could with the
Mm.
understanding that she possessed. No criticism of her at all.
Yeah.
It was just, I was carrying these traumatic wounds and and I noticed that there's a difference in from one individual to the next. Like we're not all identical. Our makeup varies a bit, and some people are a bit more able to compartmentalize to set that over there. A
Mhm.
lot of the wounding trauma. Now, a lot of times, what I'll see happen is that as they get older in their 40s and 50s and 60s, then it'll begin to express through their bodies. Well, for me, it was just I was consumed by it.
Mhm.
And so I was flailing in the dark in a sense. And there was, like the backlog of all this trauma, painful emotion that I was holding in my body. That was what was maintaining these attachments and making it so difficult for me to let go. Now, when I started to say I would form these attachments, I'd get really strung out on someone. But at a certain point when things weren't working, when the relationship was blowing up or she cut me off or something like that,
Right.
then I would go really deep into the depths of the pain and I would keep breathing again with my awareness centered in the depths of what I was feeling. And then at that point at which it broke open, began to come out of my body in waves. And I could feel some letting go. But one of the things that I didn't grasp for quite some time is that I needed to be doing practice on a daily basis every day. And it wasn't until years later, I began to train with this master from China in the internal martial arts, Xing Yi Quan, Baguazhang. And I had this new model of these individuals who trained in these Taoist lineages, the internal martial arts, that they would be doing this internal qigong practice, and they're continually building greater and greater presence and power. When I started doing more consistent practice and different applications of it too, I intuitively, my guidance brought me into my heart. And when I first began to center there were periods where I just felt deadness or numbness. And I would just, night after night, I would keep my awareness there, keep breathing, following it. And that awareness began to open up, faint vapors of feeling and longing and loneliness and emptiness. And so we store, you think of like the hard drive of a computer,
Mhm.
and it stores all this data and audio and video files, text files, everything. So our bodies, the different organs of the body or regions of the body, store all this content. And so night after night doing this practice, going into my heart, and it more of this kept opening,
Mm.
emerging. And then I kept working with this practice, and as I was moving through that, there was a sense of euphoria and greater
Mm.
connectedness to a higher power. But the other thing too is I was discovering is that our bodies and minds have an innate healing intelligence. Like you get a cut or bruise,
Mhm.
and the body goes to work. After a week, you may not see the bruise. It disappears. Not, if the cut's not too deep, you don't even see a scar.
That is amazing. I love that experience where you explain that those memories get stored in the body as that storage system and that content. It's so hard to explain that to sometimes people, that your emotional memories are actually stored in your tissues, in your muscles, because most people think that memory is just in the mind. And
Oh, no.
those, when you're going through that, it brings up those memories from your body. When did that pain turn into purpose so that it helped you to see, this is what I need to learn from it?
It began when I had the opportunity to work with some extraordinarily gifted healers, like from Brazil and the Philippines. And these sessions were extraordinarily helpful because I could feel like a lot of the adversity and the trauma that we carry, it gets hardwired into us. I mean, we're formatted literally. And so that can make it extraordinarily difficult for us to free ourselves from these patterns, this dysfunction that we enact in our relationships. I could feel that presence working within me. It was literally taking that lived experience, all the emotions attached to it, and I was digesting it like you digest the food you eat. And also, as that was happening, this new foundation is taking shape. Like when we live through these traumas and other adversity, we get these really distorted configurations that take shape inside of us. And because of those distorted configurations, we move out into the world, we're interacting with people, and often people are not all that conscious of why they respond to us as they do, but they, from their own subconscious, they're picking up on signals. And so we're in this kind of distorted, dysfunctional kind of relationship with them. And so what I found is that as I continue to go through the vision quest, this new foundation taking place. And so it's a continual process for me. It's
Sure.
ongoing. And as you're doing this practice, you bring more of the soul into your body, and you have the structure, the infrastructure to hold his presence. So you're more grounded. You have this strong, healthy, resilient foundation, so you could be more fully present and engaged in your life here on planet Earth. But then more of your soul presence comes into your body too. I think most of us have seen the yin yang symbol.
Mhm.
And so the dark and the light.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to go back to that moment where you said you were processing. These memories are coming up. The Kokoro
Yeah,
repatterning method has a 4 R's framework.
yeah,
We help people to see so that they can recognize what is happening inside of me, so that they can own that and do that for themselves. That first, there's the 4 R's. The first R is recognize.
yeah,
Second R is remove. Third R
yeah,
is replace, and
yeah.
fourth R is reimagining. So it's really a full shift from the clouds into the sun.
Recognition is critical. And it's the first step because
Yeah.
there's a blindness.
Yeah.
like when I was cycling through some of those destructive relationships, what happens is when we're caught up in a lot of the drama, the circumstance, the situations, the
Mm.
interactions, a lot of times we're acting out. We're not fully cognizant of what we're doing. And so we're triggered, we're reacting. But what I find is, and when I'm doing practice, for instance, or teaching someone else, and you bring the other person or the situation into your awareness and notice what you feel in your body and where
Mm.
those feelings and sensations
Yeah.
are. And you breathe from the depths of them. And as you drop into the depths of those emotions and you keep breathing, you start to see and feel from a deeper level how you're engaging and the thought processes that are operating from behind the scenes. And you feel where you're in this distorted stance or not engaging in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And so you start coming more into alignment.
Right.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that comes to mind is the six chemical needs and ways that we need to be understood or we need to be loved and accepted. And those ways of going up what I live, the Maslow's triangle, where we have our
Mm.
basic needs met and then we go to higher levels of fulfillment. And I imagine in my mind, it's like our need is like a hole in a piece of wood, so to
Mm.
speak. And when we put something like a stick in that hole, it's not filled, it's not fulfilled, it's a temporary numbing. It's temporarily causing that need to feel okay, but we know it's not the right fit. But when we actually have that need met, it's like, yes, this is in alignment. This is who I really am, and this is what I need. So that's kind of what comes to me as you're talking about going through that opening process and letting go of all the parts of you that are not who you are, the unhealthy things that are hurting you, those relationships, and coming into alignment to recognize this is really what I need. This is who I am. One of my mentors, David Emerald, he wrote The Power of TED, and I got to interview him. And one of the things I love, he said, we teach other people what we most need to learn. So I'm
Mm.
curious in your journey with everything that you've been through, what is it now that you feel like is your aha? I got this. I'm going to teach this to other people.
I think the biggest thing is the whole experience of how I carried so much of this trauma, the wounding, the dysfunction, and I was unconsciously acting out. And I would see in relationships going back and how I was approaching it from this place of, profoundly deep wounding, being traumatized and
Yeah.
having these needs. And yet, as I kept doing all this practice, like when my needs weren't being met, when the relationships weren't working, and I could go into the depths of the grief, the pain, the fear of loss, all that. And the more I could digest these emotions, then it would change how I would engage with the other person. And these parts of me that were so wounded would begin to heal. It's seldom for so many people goes that far beyond intellectual understanding. There may be a surface level emotional processing, but often what I see in people is that intellectually they understand their patterns, and yet a lot of the emotional residue and the trauma is still held in their bodies. They understand the dynamic, and yet they're still struggling within that limited framework. When we're in our head, and even if we gain the intellectual understandings, when we carry this wounding, and the subconscious mind has so much more power and mass than the conscious mind.
I love it. All the gifts that you've been through, all of this lived experience. It sounds like this treasure that you've come back with is the actual practice that you walk through with people to help
Yeah,
them to learn to digest it with them so that they're not doing that alone. That
yeah.
sounds like that's the big thing that you now have that you didn't have before after going through your own journey. And now that you've experienced that, what advice would you give to someone that is in the beginning? They're disconnected. They want to be able to reconnect, but like you said, they're not connected in their body and their soul. And where would you direct them to begin?
Well, we need to educate ourselves. We need that cognitive understanding. Sometimes we can learn things through podcast or YouTube videos. There is the risk that we can just kind of go down different rabbit holes and self-diagnose and go off on crazy tangents. But as we grow, as we evolve, we tend to find ourselves drawn to practitioners who can carry us, who can take us to that next level in our development. The basic practice I teach people: acknowledge what's happening, what's going on in your life, whatever concerns you're faced with. What do you feel in response to it? What emotions and bodily sensations are arising? Where are these feelings and sensations in the body? And again, I said, what is it? Like, is it sadness, grief, uncertainty, self-doubt, anger, frustration?
Mhm.
And there's a whole range of emotions. There's a
For
lot of
sure.
pleasant, enjoyable feelings too, like
Mhm.
anticipation and that feeling of connectedness with someone. But so you can work with the whole range of emotions, but get inside what you feel. Bring as much awareness as you can to what you feel. And with your awareness centered in the depths of what you're feeling, breathe all the way down to your abdomen, expanding your abdomen, then your rib cage, taking a full deep breath. Pause briefly, and then exhale as fully, completely as you can. Pause again. Complete the cycle. When you're sitting doing practice, close your eyes, really drop into the depths of what you're feeling. But you can bring this practice into your daily life. You're washing clothes, folding laundry, you're doing other housework, you're walking somewhere. Like, you can do it when you're driving, as long as you stay focused on the road and what other
Exactly.
cars are doing. Just make sure that you're concentrating on driving safely. But do practice every day. There's other practices. Like, I don't always have emotion surfacing at any given moment. Sometimes you could just focus on sensations within the body, stress or tension, like the tension you hold in your neck or shoulders or abdomen,
Mhm.
some other part of your body. You can just bring your awareness deep into the middle of your chest cavity where your heart and lungs reside, or your abdomen. Really give it time. I mean, if you only have 15 minutes, do that. But I will say, if you could extend your practice 30 minutes, an hour or more, it gets a lot more powerful. Most days I'll do 3 hours. If you have the opportunity to work with someone such as myself individually, having trained with a traditional Native American doctor, I work as a conduit, allowing this presence to work through me. So what happens in the individual sessions is it takes all that lived experience, all the adversity you've lived through, and you're digesting it, it's being transformed so it becomes fuel for growth. And it's building this foundation so you become much stronger and more resilient, and you function at a much higher level. So we need
Right.
practice, we need intervention.
Yeah. So that mind and body and heart can all come into oneness, right? And that's what
Right.
Kokoro means. The oneness of heart, body, mind, and soul. I love that. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been
Thank you.
such a joy and a pleasure to have you here. And I love that your advice to people in going back to where do you begin comes back to the beginning of your journey, finding a mentor. That's what you were seeking out and looking for as you began that learning process for yourself, and finding someone that could help guide you through. Because it's like we're walking in the dark. We have no idea what the landmarks are, what we're doing. And having that mentor can make all the difference. That could be a community, that could be an individual person, but I invite listeners to listen to that whispering of the soul within you and find the path that is right for you. One next step is all it takes every single day. So, Ben,
Right.
can you share with us, where can people find you?
Sure. The main website is just my name, benoofana.com. I have other websites as well, teachmetomeditate.com. Wherever you are in the world, I can teach you this whole system of intensive meditation practices to enable
Beautiful.
you to become more fully embodied. And because of what I've gone through, I'm able to work with people, facilitate the healing transformation of those in the midst of a breakup, divorce, ghosting. And so if you're in the acute stages of heartbreak, for instance, I offer a course, Breakup First Aid. And then there's a much more intensive deep dive. So you gain a much deeper understanding about what this is all about and how to dismantle those deeply internalized patterns, dynamics,
Yes.
and build a much healthier, stronger, more resilient foundation that makes reciprocal love possible.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes. When we love ourselves, it becomes more possible to love other people. I love to think about like giving and receiving. That was one of the major things that I was able to recognize through my process as well.
Uh,
I will definitely put that in the show notes. Ben Oofana, Oofana. So if you're looking for that online, you'll know where to find him. Listeners, find your purpose, listen to your inner voice, and take one step every day. This is Pennie Wilson signing off.